What's up, fellas? In the first of today's videos, we're once again going to be talking about some NBA trade rumor stuff because that's just the part of the year that we're in. And in this video, we're talking specifically about a couple of Boston Celtics rumors via Shams yesterday, specifically relating to Jeremy Grant and Nikola Vucevic. The Celtics, as I've talked about in multiple videos, are going to be very active in the trade market leading up to this trade deadline. They have the trade exception. They have multiple young players. They have, all of their future first-round picks at their disposal as well. And, you could make an argument they're 1.5 moves away from being a really, really good team at the top of the Eastern Conference this season. So I think they're going to be active, and we're going to take a look at these two rumors specifically, how realistic it is for them to trade for Grant or Vucevic, and how likely it is I think it is actually going to happen. But really quickly, before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing. If you're new here, what's up? My name is Tucker. I upload NBA stuff on this channel twice a day, every single day. So if you're looking for the most consistent NBA content on YouTube, then you found it, and consider subscribing. You can also leave a like rating on the videos as well if you enjoy them, and you can check me out at various socials to hang out with me outside of these videos in a Linktree link down in the description below. With those things said, let's go ahead and get started. So we'll go ahead and talk about Jeremy Grant first, and then we'll talk about Nikola Vucevic. But first, let's talk about the context of the Celtics and kind of their whole trade environment going into the season, right? So for them, they are in this really weird spot where I think people believe in the talent that's on the roster, specifically with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, and Kemba's starting to play a little bit better, and Marcus Smart is going to get healthy at some point. And you could start to envision a roster and a group that could make some noise in the East and could kind of meet the expectations that people had for this team prior to the year. I personally thought they were going to be a top 3 team in the conference before this season. Certainly that has not been the case to this point in the year. But with the trade exception, with these younger players, with, the multiple first-round picks at their disposal in the future, they can make a move. And the two rumors yesterday were Jeremy Grant and Nikola Vucevic. Now, for Grant, this was a name I was a bit surprised to see available, either available in the trade market or involved in trade rumors. I think it makes sense for Boston to call and ask about Jeremy Grant, but I think in this moment, it's unlikely that Detroit would trade him because he's arguably the most valuable guy on the roster. People didn't love the contract at the time, and I think that was a fair criticism, but he's had a fantastic season and is a borderline all-star caliber guy, making $20 million for the next couple of seasons. At any point, if they wanted to, they could trade him, and I think people would be interested. But I think right now is probably not a time that Detroit would trade him. Now, let's just say, for example, however, that they would. How would Boston make this work? Well, as is the case with most trades as we lead up to the trade deadline for Boston, it involves this giant trade exception that they have as a result of getting rid of Gordon Hayward. So they can just take Jeremy Grant into the trade exception. You don't have to worry about matching salaries, and then you just have to worry about sending back enough value to, in this case, Detroit. So you can add in Romeo Langford, you can add in Carson Edwards, you can add in Naismith, you can add in any number of young players that you'd like. If you want to throw some picks in there as well, that's fine. I'm not here to argue with you about what the amount of value is for Jeremy Grant that is realistic to be able to make a trade for, because I'm not sure anybody really knows what that is. But the point is, if Boston really wanted to go out and get Jeremy Grant and he was available, they would be able to do so. Now, let's just say they made the move. There's some really interesting lineup stuff here, especially if you are committed to just not having a center on the court. If you want to go Kemba, Smart, Brown, Tatum, and Jeremy Grant, that's a really, really interesting group. Now, once you do bring a big guy onto the floor, trying to figure out where Grant would fit amongst the Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum fit, yeah, you kind of have to figure that out. But just having your 5 best players on the floor is never really a bad idea. And that's a super, super interesting lineup, especially considering that Grant has shown some really nice rim protection ability in the past and has played, at a taller position, played smaller in the past, especially in Denver. And so that combination of length and athleticism and quickness and defense would be a really, really interesting group, I think, to kind of look at there in Boston. Ultimately, I have no idea what Grant's value is supposed to be. Of course, if Boston wanted to, they could give up Marcus Smart in this trade as well. I don't think that they're going to do that in exchange for Jeremy Grant, but if they wanted to, they could, if they really wanted to try and entice Detroit to trade him. And then you can go with, Kemba, Brown, Tatum, Grant, and then Robert Williams or whoever, Tristan Thompson, whatever 5 you want to throw out there. Again, ultimately, I don't think that they're going to be moving him, but it's interesting that he was involved in this rumor. Now, speaking of the 5 spot, now we move on to our other rumor as it relates to Boston, and that is Nikola Vucevic. Now, this is a guy that I think is very, very likely that he will end up being traded, whether it be before this trade deadline or at some point in his Orlando Magic tenure. This is a team that should absolutely be selling, given some of the injury issues that they've had. Vucevic is basically their entire team. I think you could argue that if they did trade him away for, young assets, they would probably have the worst healthy roster in the entire league. But still, you know, considering how bad things are anyway, I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to cash in on your all-star level talent. And of course, Boston has a huge problem at the 5 spot, gives them a really good offensive player in that position. And I think it's a good fit for either side. Again, you can just take him in via the trade exception. You need to get rid of some salary in order to be underneath the hard cap, but you would do that regardless, assuming you're sending out a combination of, again, Langford, Naismith, Carson Edwards, whatever combination of young guys you want to trade away, plus the picks. Again, if you wanted to, you could include Marcus Smart, but I don't know that that's all that realistic of an expectation if you're a Magic fan. Now, the thing with Vucevic is he's a proven player. He's a more proven player than Jeremy Grant. I mean, this guy's an all-star, has actually made an all-star team. He's not just an all-star caliber player the way that Jeremy Grant has been at points this year. He is just straight up an all-star. So his value should be higher despite the fact that he is slightly older. And Orlando, even though they are sellers, and even though they're not having a great season, even though it makes a lot of sense for them to trade away Vucevic, they're still going to want good value out of this guy. They're not just going to give him away for absolutely nothing. So if you're Boston, be expecting to give up some picks in this deal. Even if you're giving up a couple of young players, be expecting to give up some picks here as well. But then if you add Vucevic, again, it's a similar thing with Grant, where like you kind of plug the 5 guys together and you're like, wow, this is a really interesting group. And the depth and the bench in either of these scenarios wouldn't be great, but I don't think it's great right now either. So at least this way you can kind of just mix and match all of the starters to be in there with the bench unit, and you have critically here another offensive player that can really help the other guys that aren't so great when they're on the floor. So like at any point in the game, assuming you make this Vucevic trade, at any point in the game, you're probably going to have 2 of Brown, Tatum, Walker, or Vucevic on the floor at any given time, which means that the other 3 guys just basically need to be able to make shots off the ball and play defense and rebound. And that's a much better position to be in than where Boston has been at times this season, where it's basically just been Brown, Tatum, and then the other guys are not contributing in any way, whether that be because Kemba's not healthy and not playing, or because he's on the floor and just not really doing much. So Vucevic is a nice little insurance policy here for Boston against this recent stretch of good play by Kemba just being a bit of a fluke, and just having another really good offensive player on the floor would be so helpful for them. And that's kind of the mindset here, is how can they improve this roster in a way where, yes, they do have to give up some future assets, but it makes them a more complete team, and as a result lifts up the rest of the roster that might not be great outside of the big time players, the best guys. The depth might not be fantastic, but you raise your ceiling to a point where you can contend in an East that arguably is not all that strong. I think Philly's good. I think Brooklyn's good. I have some questions in the postseason about Milwaukee, but in the regular season, at least they're good. But, there's no Lakers caliber team here that you're going to have to fight through, in my opinion, in the East. So if you're Boston, you can just give yourself a chance, get to the conference finals. Maybe you can be a finals team this year, despite the fact that it has been kind of a rough year. Now, the counter to all of that would be, why wouldn't you just keep the trade exception until the offseason? Why wouldn't you just keep your picks, keep your young players, and keep yourself in a position to be able to make a even bigger move, whether it be Bradley Beal or some other star that becomes available, rather than just going out and getting someone like Grant or Vucevic, who are good players, but don't impact your team as much as someone like, for example, Bradley Beal. That's an interesting argument, and it all just kind of depends on where you're at if you're a Boston fan. If you're one of the fans that's a bit more optimistic about this roster and thinks that all you need is 1 or 2 moves and then you're right back into the hunt for a conference title, okay, well then maybe you go out and make this move. If you're one of those fans of Boston or just a fan of the NBA and you're looking at this team and you're thinking, they just don't have it, it's not going to work, they just need to run it back next year, save their assets, don't go all in this year, then you're probably not, a big believer in these rumors. I think it's interesting that these are the 2 players that are coming up, and as I mentioned in a video yesterday, I think it's pretty likely that they are going to make some kind of move. I don't know if it's going to be on the level of something like this, where they're giving up, future picks and things like that. But I think they've been in this scenario one too many times where they could have made a move and they didn't, and then they get, to the conference finals, but no further. And maybe they would have made the finals had they made a move. So I think ultimately, whether it's Grant or Vucevic, I don't know, but I think ultimately Boston will be making a move as we get closer to the trade deadline. And it's pretty easy to come up with how they would go about doing that, with the trade exception, with the young players, with the picks, and ideally keeping Marcus Smart as well. Add one more good player to the starting lineup. Marcus Smart gets healthy, Kemba Walker keeps playing better, and this Celtics team would get scary in a hurry, in my opinion. But yeah, that is going to be the end of the first video of the day, and I thank you guys very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the box boxes on screen. In the second video of the day, I'm going to be talking about the Milwaukee Bucks, which I mentioned briefly earlier, some of the concerns that I have for them specifically into the postseason, and whether or not we should actually be believing in them as real, true contenders. That's the second video of the day coming out later today. Like I said in the beginning, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like the video if you did. Check out the social link, the Linktree link down in the description below to hang out with me outside of these videos. And yeah, hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.